Sometime during 2020, I remember feeling a sense of disorientation. It wasn't just the social unrest in my city or the smoke discoloring the sky. It was deeper than political chaos and the growing awareness of democracy in decline. I found myself wanting to place what I was experiencing in the context of history. Did it feel like this in the 1960s? In the 1940s? Was the country really falling apart, or is this just what it feels like to be an adult, living through events that you're finally old enough to understand? So sometime during this period, I called one of the few people in my life who could actually answer this question, my grandma. That phone call inspired me to do something I should have done a long time ago. I sat down with each of my grandparents and asked them to tell me about their lives. We talked about politics, periods of cultural change, and social movements, but mostly we talked about the personal things that make up a life. Childhood, family, work, friendships, and I learned a lot about what changes in a lifetime.
My name is Phyllis Siegel, and we are in Thousand Oaks, California, where we have lived for coming on 23 years.
Great. And today is May 27th.
Today is May 27, 2023.
Grandma Phyllis was born in 1936 in Chicago, Illinois.
My parents owned a movie theater on the south side, and they took me with them. I used to climb up to the projectionist and watch the film go through the machine. That was one of the only things we did together. Wow. One of the things I loved about my mom was she worked for the Red Cross during the war. She didn't do much else. She didn't knit, she didn't sew, she didn't have hobbies. She wasn't loud, she didn't sing, she didn't play the piano. She just took care of the house and us.
In the late 1940s, when my grandma was a preteen, only about a third of women worked outside the home. That number grew by the time my aunt was born in 1960, but it was still more common than not for mothers to be housewives. Grandma Phyllis went to college and worked as a high school teacher, but when kids came along, she was happy to stay home.
That's all I wanted to be was mommy. That's all I wanted. Did you know your mom and my firstborn were less than a year apart? That's how bad I wanted babies, kids.
While my grandma was comfortable following in her mother's footsteps as a stay-at-home mom, her parents had other qualities she was determined to leave behind.
My father was very, very, very mean. I got whipped a lot with a belt, and I was told I was dumb. They didn't talk about love. Maybe that's what they thought they're supposed to do. You're supposed to keep them not getting in trouble. I knew I could raise kids better than I was raised. And that's what I wanted, why I wanted kids. I just wanted to love them, love them, love them. That was it.
Parenting norms and expectations have changed dramatically over the decades. While advice to new mothers in the 1940s emphasized hygiene, health, and discipline, a new layer of psychological guidance around love, flexibility, and self-esteem began popping up in the 60s and 70s.
I never spoke ill to them. I never called them any name. I complimented my kids all the time on everything they did. If the sky was painted purple, it was beautiful, I told them. And I don't know if it's right, but everything was positive and loving.
One popular writer whose parenting advice shaped the mid-century was Dr. Benjamin Spock, an American pediatrician and later political activist. His approach wasn't popular with everyone.
Several people did argue that you offered more permissive practices of child rearing, and that created a more anti-authoritarian generation that questioned more, that rebelled against authority more, and that this was part of the reason for the flower children in the 1960s, the anti-war movement.
I get stopped on city streets and in airports by people who come up, recognize me, and thank me for writing the book that helped them raise two fine children. And then they often add, and I don't see that it's permissive. And I say, that's right.
Perhaps my grandma found a sweet spot when she was raising kids. The right balance of warmth and discipline, permissiveness, and authority. But when she looks around these days, that balance feels off.
It seems to me they're not raised to know right from wrong.
I can only imagine how different parenting looks today to someone like my grandma. Harsh discipline in the home has fallen out of favor even more than it did during the Dr. Spock era. It's far more common for both parents to work full-time, and despite that, both fathers and mothers report spending more hours a week on childcare. My sister Katie happens to be pregnant right now with her first child, so I spoke with her and her husband David about how they plan to parent and what they intend to leave behind from previous generations.
If you look left here, you can see where the freeway comes over the one thing that I think about wanting to do differently from the way that I experienced childhood, I think I really struggled to feel like my parents trusted me to make good decisions. They were pretty strict. You know, I've come to understand that comes from love, that comes from wanting to protect your children. I think as a parent, it will be very challenging to unwind that like innate desire to protect our child and keep her sort of in a controlled setting. But I really would like to try to find a way to give my children a little bit more freedom.
Regardless of where they land on the strictness spectrum, Katie and David had one big thing in common with Grandma Phyllis's parenting philosophy.
The most important behavior is to show our children that we love them. I think everything else we can figure out. Everything else kind of stems from that.
I'm beyond happy, proud the way they turned out and how they raised their kids. That's amazing to me. They're just the best parents, all of them. They just love their kids and they treated them well.
You excited, Grandma?
That's a biggie for me, biggie, which I think is obvious.
While my grandma mostly spoke to me about her childhood experiences and her choices as a parent, my two grandpas focused instead on their adult lives, especially their time in the military and their decades at work.
I was born September 23rd, 1941, in a little town in Pennsylvania. I grew up there. I lived there until I was 17 years old, and then I joined the Navy and never went back.
That's my Grandpa Tom, my dad's dad, and Grandpa Joe, my mom's father and Phyllis's husband.
My full name is Joseph, middle initial H, like Harry, Siegel.
Both men volunteered to join the Navy as young adults.
We were President Kennedy's floating White House. I was on the USS Northampton, and he could helicopter from the White House out to the ship. It was his command post at sea.
When I volunteered to become active duty, I ended up on an aircraft carrier, USS Boxer. There were like 4,000 men on the aircraft carrier. We were in a war against Korea.
Since the 1950s, when my grandfather served, the number of active duty military personnel in the U.S. has dropped significantly. This decline is even more dramatic when you realize that the U.S. population has more than doubled in that same period. While both men made it through military service safely, I was struck by how their experiences, far more common among their peers than it would be today, shaped their lives afterwards, as fathers and breadwinners.
I was stocking my dairy goods, butter and cheese and things like that, and the announcement was made about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, and it was a big event.
This is Walter Cronkite in our newsroom in There has been an attempt, as perhaps you know now, on the life of President Kennedy. He was wounded in an automobile driving from Dallas Airport into downtown Dallas, along with Governor Connolly of Texas. They've been taken to Parkland Hospital there, where their condition is as yet unknown. We have not been told their condition.
A big effect on me, I think, since we were Kennedy's floating White House, you know, and there I was 21, 22 years old, with a young family. We were in a Cold War with Russia at that time, and it would be an opportune time for them to attack us. We just didn't know what was going to happen, you know. That was my worry, though, that I'd get called back into active service.
Meanwhile, Grandpa Joe spent his post-Navy years as a traveling shoe salesman, making different kinds of sacrifices for the stability of his family.
It was a living, and we had a young family, but I missed a lot of birthdays and weddings and parties and what have you, because I had to support the people in the factory to be sure that they had enough business to keep working. I was with that company for over 50 years. A long time.
While Grandpa Joe spent his entire career designing and selling women's shoes around the country, Grandpa Tom switched jobs a few times. He spent years running the Sunrise Bakery in Eugene, Oregon. Over 2 decades, he expanded, sold the bakery, bought it back when the new owner went under, and reopened it again, doing his best to tackle all the challenges of small business ownership. In the 1990s, he began using this knowledge to help others on a similar path, providing guidance as a small business and tax consultant.
Once you're on that track, it's difficult to make any real changes. It was for me anyway. Life just happened. The years go by quicker than you think.
I dream where I could almost get up and get dressed, ready to go to work. I mean, it's weird. We were fortunate in the years that we were in business, the business was as good as it was then. Today, half the department stores that used to be around are no longer in business anymore. And independent stores, the same thing. It's a different world today than it was before.
Some of what my grandpa said resonated with me. The way time flies in a job that may or may not be your great passion in life. The recognition that many people float from one opportunity to another until you find yourself on a career path that's hard to get out of. I'm 30 now, I'm getting married later this year, and thinking about starting a family of my own one day. And what feels so different to me is that both grandpas were able to make a decent living. Neither came from much money, but they both worked hard, and with the cost of living back then, that was enough.
I thought that getting my master's degree would be the biggest achievement, but as it turned out, when I came to Eugene, I discovered that that degree and 50 cents would get me a cup of coffee. And, you know, really what I achieved through the perseverance and the hard work that I did.
I'm the most proud of earning a living, helping our grandkids, not having to take loans out while they're in school. I didn't burn any bridges. I didn't screw anybody along the way. I was honest with everybody, and it paid off. It really paid off.
Now I'm 81. Don't know how much longer I'll live, but I'm content. It's okay with me if he wants to take me anytime, you know.
We couldn't have predicted anything better with all you guys, really. That's what you live for. That's what you live for.
After 3 interviews with 3 grandparents, I was beginning to understand how history unfolds in a lifetime. often as a backdrop to or subtle influence on the steady stream of regular moments, family milestones, and personal choices we make. Perhaps more importantly, I gained a greater understanding of my grandparents as individuals. Grandma Phyllis's fierce warmth, Grandpa Tom's tenacity, and Grandpa Joe's career-long integrity. Just one interview remained. My dad's mom, Leela, and the one whose phone call back in 2020 inspired this project. In many ways, Grandma Leela reminds me most of myself.
I listened to every family story, and I was very fortunate. I had 4 grandmothers alive when I was born, and I had some step-grandfathers, and I spent time with all of them, and I just soaked it up.
In addition to our interest in collecting stories from previous generations, we also shared an academic spirit.
I was the kid who always raised their hand, got straight A's, talked too much, drove the teachers crazy, editor of the newspaper, and I was vice president of the student body, and my mother used to joke that I was busy running the school, no time for boyfriend. And I loved school, and I wanted to go to college. My mother told me one time, why don't you just go get a job like other people and get married? But that isn't what I wanted. I had big ideas. I was going to be the first female editorial writer because they didn't have women who wrote op-ed columns. So it was interesting. That was my ambition.
Afraid she'd end up an old maid, Leela's parents said college was off the table, so she had to pursue her ambitions and her independence through a more unconventional path.
I saw a movie about the Navy. It was called Skirts Ahoy with Esther Williams. I watched that movie and I thought, I'm going to join the Navy. In May of 1959, I got on an airplane, first time in my life on an airplane, and I flew to Washington, D.C. area and joined the Navy. There were 3,000 men and 300 women on this base, and they had all of us women doing very simple work. We were cataloging things and working with ledgers and doing some typing and all that. And I was still having the time of my life. So we'd all pile on a bus every day and go to where we had to sign our lives away about not talking about what we were doing. And then every night I'd go back to the barracks and change my clothes as fast as I could and go down to the enlisted men's club and dance all night.
Somewhere in between all the late nights, Grandma Leela met my Grandpa Tom.
I went and had my teeth cleaned, and he was the dental technician who cleaned my teeth. He was cute and young. I was in love, fell in love. We got married, and I had a baby like 9 months later, because that's what we did then.
The young couple moved back to California, and Grandma Leela, while raising 2 little kids, did what she'd always wanted. She went to college, taking one class at a time.
There were so many women in my classes who had babies. These were all women who had gotten married and stayed home and had babies, and they decided to go back to school. And the other students hated us because we were getting the good grades, because we were so serious about what we were doing.
Despite the work ethic Grandma Leela observed, at that time, women were still less likely to attend college compared to men. That changed in the 1970s, when enrollment rates continued to climb for women but slowed down for men. Since the 1980s, the college gender gap has widened, with many more women signing up for school than their male peers. When Grandma Leela completed her degree, she continued her trailblazing streak, not as the female editorial writer she'd always imagined as a kid, but as a police dispatcher in another male-dominant field.
I walked in the first day, and it was this old-time country police department in this really old building. Open counter, open front doors. I had the time of my life. And I took to it. And I didn't even know it was something I was good at. After I was there for 2 weeks, they had me work a night all by myself. And the first night I worked, an officer got shot. And I thought it happened all the time. Movies. 15 people in the whole department when I started. And I grew with the department. And I loved that job. And Tom hated that I loved the job. And that was hard.
Why did he hate it?
Because I would love going to work.
My grandma and grandpa grew apart and eventually separated, leaving Leela a single mother of 2. While raising her boys, she kept working in the police department, picked up another degree in criminal justice, and fought for a promotion to dispatch center supervisor. When my dad grew up and went away to college, my grandma was struck by how much had changed for women.
He had all these women in his class, and I had no idea that they were all studying things like genetics. I had no idea how much the world was changing in those things and the things they were studying. And all these women were going to med school right along with him. Totally new.
When you looked at that, did that make you sad that you didn't have that opportunity when you were young, or just
Oh, I was just thrilled for the change, and my mother was too. We used to talk about it. You know, and even the girls who worked for me. I remember this one girl, she was like my secretary, and I said, you know, you have potential. I says, you need to go take a class in supervision. You could be running this place. And she was too scared. And she says, nobody ever told me I had potential before. And I was thinking, my God, well, nobody ever told me that either. And I was talking to my granddaughter Amanda the other day about, she's been running the PTA for 2 years at this school, and she keeps going to the school board meetings and raising hell. I says, have you ever thought about running for an office locally? I says, there are women in this country who are mayors and governors who are kicking ass all over the country. It thrills me. And when I talk to my friend Marilyn, we talk about it all the time, the opportunities women have to do something important, and they're doing it. If I talk to young people, I tell them all the time, and I say, I love all my girls in my family because they all want to be something and do somebody. Do not do somebody. You can fix that. That's funny.
It's been almost 2 years since I started this project. In that time alone, our nation re-elected a criminal and a demagogue. A destructive war took hold of the Middle East, and wildfires tore through Hawaii and Southern California. Has it always been like this? My grandparents showed me that, to some extent, yes. Discrimination, unrest, and economic hardship showed up in each of their stories. But so did adventure, courage, and falling in love. The world soundtrack plays on, sometimes scary and loud and hard to ignore, other times an ambient buzz in the background while we focus on the people who matter most. In these past 2 years, I also watched my older sister become a mom.
Hey.
I traveled to Germany, Italy, Mexico, Montana, and New York. I got married and returned from my honeymoon the day of a presidential assassination attempt. I watched Russia invade Ukraine alongside my grad school classmates and saw flags pop up around my neighborhood like yellow flowers in the spring. I turned 31 and 32. I'm still overwhelmed by the slice of history I'm living through. But I'm grateful to have 4 guides who've shown me how to make a life out of the time I've been given.
Isn't that wonderful? I think it's fabulous.